So next we have Tom Richardson. So Tom works as at the Sustainable Restaurant Association, promoting sustainability with restaurants, pubs and cafes, as well as encouraging diners to use the power of their appetite by making more sustainable choices when eating out. He also runs a small market garden, growing organic veg for a community veg box scheme. Thank you so much, Tom. Over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Rosa, and thank you everyone for having me. So I think that was a really great intro to what I do. I'm going to talk generally today about food and sustainability at a really broad level. And I think the first thing to note is just it's been a real year where food has been right front and centre as a real major news focus, whether that's empty shelves in supermarkets, Marcus Rashford and the free school meals story, mountains of food waste, fishing quotas and Brexit, chlorinated chicken, obsessions with sourdough baking, and kind of, I guess, most recently, the threat to hospitality jobs. It feels like food has been everywhere. And I think that's a really timely reminder that food really is kind of core to our culture and our everyday life. And it's going to be core to the climate crisis as well. This is a quote from Tim Gore, who's head of policy and climate change at Oxfam, who says, "The main way that most people will experience climate change is through its impact on food, what they eat, how it's grown, the price they pay for it, and the availability and choices that they have." But not only is it core to how we'll experience climate change, it's also the main cause of it. In terms of different industries, it's absolutely the biggest contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. It's the #1 cause of deforestation, and it's the main driver of biodiversity loss as well. And as Miata hinted at as well, it has to change. Scientists from the UN estimate that we've only got about 60 years of farming left if we carry on our kind of very destructive farming practices that are prevalent today. But I think the good news is that all of that means that fixing the food system and making positive steps to address those challenges is about as close as I think we can get to having a real sustainability panacea and making a big step forward to trying to reduce global temperatures and solve climate change. So what's happening now to try and do that? I'm going to start at kind of the macro level, and globally there's this kind of big debate going on at the moment in the sector between the prophets and the wizards. And the prophets on the left here are the people who believe in the idea of regenerative agriculture and the idea that we should move towards small-scale farms and farming with nature and agroforestry and principles of trying to devolve our food system and make it as sustainable as possible. On the other side, you have the wizards, and these are the people who believe in technology as having all of the answers. For those of you who watched Apocalypse Cow, you will have seen George Monbiot talking about food made out of thin air from using electricity to kind of, the text totally beyond me, to be honest, but something like that. These are the people who advocate for finding drought-resistant crops and lab-grown meat and indoor farming. And the idea behind that side of the argument is that if you can find much more efficient ways of growing food and use less land, then you have more space to turn over to nature. So that's kind of the big global debate I think that's happening in the sector at the moment. In the UK, I think the other conversation that's really at the fore at the moment is the fact that the agriculture bill is currently going through. So this is a conversation that's yo-yoing at the moment between the House of Commons and the House of Lords about our food standards in trade deals post-Brexit. And this is where the conversation of chlorinated chicken has come from. And I think what's interesting about that from our perspective is that there's no talk at the moment in the agriculture bill about protecting environmental standards from the UK. But 95% of British people want to make sure that our standards are maintained in any future trade deals. And I think what that means is that we're going to see a lot more labelling from food businesses and a lot more demand from consumers for specific things. So I think we're going to see a lot more talk about non-GMO in the next few years, a lot more talk about deforestation-free products, organic products, pasture-fed meat, UK produce. All of those kind of things are going to come to the fore a lot more. But I think the question for storytelling that's really interesting is what we can do at a really individual level as citizens. And the first thing to say is that we really, really can all make a difference. 3 times a day, you kind of have the chance to vote. Every time you eat, you have the chance to vote for kind of a better food system and to make a difference with climate change, because we're all part of that food system. And the 4 things that I'm going to focus on for now, some of them might be obvious and some of them hopefully aren't, are reducing food waste, avoiding meat and dairy, buying local food, and growing your own. And I think what's interesting about these kind of 4 things is they're exactly the methods that we talked about solving the food system in World War II, when we had our Big Dig for Victory campaign. People were encouraged not to waste food, and we got up to a place where 20% of, or almost 20% of the UK's fruit and vegetables that we ate were grown in allotments and gardens, and that's the kind of change that we need to see now. At the moment, it's about 3%. So taking each of those in turn, first of all, food waste. We all know that flying has a huge impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But what you might not realise is that food waste accounts for more global greenhouse gas emissions than flying. And that's because of all of the energy that we put into producing food that ends up being thrown away. And that's 1/3 of all the food we produce globally at the moment is wasted. And in the UK, the majority of that wasting happens in the home. So in the UK, we throw away £14 billion worth of edible food in our homes every year. So a huge way of making a dent in the climate crisis and is to reduce the amount of food that we waste. The second one is kind of been talked about for a long time now as one of the major ways that you can reduce your climate impact, and that is avoiding meat and dairy. And with a shift in diet and reducing the amount of food that we waste, we can absolutely feed a growing population sustainably. At the moment, 60% of agricultural land is used to produce beef, which is a terrible waste of all of that agricultural land. And if we are able to shift our diets, will go a long way to solving problems with land use. And I think the point that I want to make here is that it really is already a mainstream movement here. And I know that SOAPs are already doing a great job at talking about this, but 23% of Brits intend to be totally meat-free by the end of 2020. So it's an incredibly mainstream idea already. The third point I wanted to talk about was buying local, and I think this doesn't have kind of a killer stat behind it, but I think it's a super important part of moving towards a more sustainable food system for a load of reasons. Buying local food generally does have a much lower carbon footprint, but that's just kind of the beginning of the story and why it is a more sustainable option. So first of all, it provides food with much more nutrition. Food starts to lose its nutrition the second it's picked. So these huge long supply chains that we've developed in this incredibly complex supply chain that's damaging the planet mean that we're also reducing the amount of nutrition that we get. Also, all of these kind of big agricultural companies that are growing our produce generally prioritise growing food that looks great, travels well, and is kind of big in yield, so that it's kind of they sell well in supermarkets. But that means that they're deprioritising nutrition. So that means you have to eat about 8 oranges to get the same amount of vitamin C in your diet as you would from 1 orange in our grandparents' age, which is an incredible stat. The second thing is that it builds community, and I think when we think about our rural communities and our urban communities, food businesses really do sit at the heart of that. Whether it's the bakery, the farmers market, the greengrocers, even the pub, all of these businesses are really core to how we kind of build community in our societies. The third is about building resilience, and I think that's about building a food system that isn't going to result in empty supermarket shelves and panic buying and further reliance on food banks in our country. If we make our food systems much more local, they're much more resilient. And the final thing is that it helps provide jobs as well. And we all know that we all need to eat. And so a really stable economy is one that has the food system at its core. And the final topic that I want to talk about was growing your own food. And I think this helps with a bit of a cultural shift that I believe we need to take across the country and across the world, which is about starting to understand more about where our food comes from. Because if you start growing your own food, that helps us understand that everything we eat comes from the earth and we rely on it. And this is again something that's grown in popularity a lot this year, with 45% of Brits now saying that they would like to have more skills in growing food. And I think whether we're talking about growing your own food, or we're talking about local food systems, or even thinking about and just making more conscious decisions about what you buy. I think it's really important to keep this in mind, and that is that food is the universal connection which everyone on the planet has to our environment. It's where you take pieces of the natural world and literally put them inside your body, and then they become part of you and keep you functioning. And I think understanding our reliance on the world around us starts with understanding that comes from the food on our plate. Thank you.